So welcome to Abundant EM. We are glad you're here. Turn to your neighbor and say, I am really happy to see your beautiful face. Ready, set, turn, and go. Happy to see your beautiful face. Okay? All right. We are glad to be here. As you guys know, our family was out of town this last week. I'm so glad I live in Denver, where there is such little humidity. We went and it was a 90% humidity and like rainy. And I think our hair was like double the volume because of how much like humid it was. But we had a good time. We're all a little more tan, a little more rested, and happy to be back to serve our family and love alongside you guys. It is really good to be back, actually. Yeah, we're happy to be here. So, all right, here we go in our series on creation and covenant, and today is the covenant day. Okay, it's a big deal today. So here we are. The Lord made a covenant out of Genesis 15. If we can all stand so we can read the word of the Lord out loud together today. It's 4 slides. Let's read it out loud together. Okay, ready? Begin. Then the Lord told him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land as your possession. But Abram replied, O sovereign Lord, how can I be sure that I will actually possess it? The Lord told him, bring me a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old female goat, a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. So Abram presented all these to him and killed them. Then he cut each animal down the middle and laid the halves side by side. He did not, however, cut the birds in half. As the sun was going down, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a terrifying darkness came down over him. Then the Lord said to Abram, you can be sure that your descendants will be strangers in a foreign land, where they will be oppressed as slaves for 400 years. After 4 generations, your descendants will return here to this land. Last slide. After the sun went down and darkness fell, Abram saw a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch pass between the halves of the carcasses. So the Lord made a covenant with Abram that day. This is the word of the Lord. You may be seated. Amen. Okay, so what's the most important contract you've ever signed in your life? Think about it. Okay, so there's contracts for jobs. Right, when you get offered a job, if someone tells you they have a job, it's not official until you have what? A contract, a letter, or when you buy a house, or when you get a loan, or any number of really important things in your life usually requires a signature. It requires some kind of formal agreement written down somewhere, something really important. So this time that we went to our trip, it was really reminiscent because the last time we were in Mexico was for our honeymoon 10 years ago, almost 10 years ago. And so I was thinking about this message, I was thinking about contracts, and I was like, you know what? The biggest contract I've ever signed in my life is my wedding license, okay? Because a house, I could sell it if I really wanted to. My kids, I cannot sell those. So, my kids are with me forever too, but like, that's different. But my kids, I chose to give birth to them, right? But wedding, I did not realize until we were getting married that like you gotta sign something. Legally, marriage is a legal contract. It's not just like a covenant before God. It's a legal binding thing. So I dug through old pictures to figure out when we signed our contract. So if you look at this slide, wow, look at Moksani's hair. Look at how black that hair looks right there. Okay, that was 10 years ago. So young. Okay. There I am signing my life away. To death do us part, through sickness or health, or, lots of crazy things we've experienced in life. And that's the picture of us after we signed. And I look at that picture now and I'm like, wow. First of all, I was 25, he was 27. So we were young and kind of dumb. And that's when you have to get married, when you're young and when you're dumb, because when you don't know anything, that's when you should get married, okay? But we were young and we were just so excited to be married. And we had no idea that over these next 10 years, where life would take us. Those of you who are married in this room, there's quite a few of us married folks now in the room, now that, a couple of us got married, okay? Some of you, it hasn't even been a year. Some of you, it's been 10, 20, 30 years, long time, okay? Maybe it's been so long that you can't remember what it was like when you got married. But that's a really, really important contract you sign legally. That forever, until one of us dies, I will remain faithful to this person all the rest of my days, in sickness or in health, in good times or bad, in rich or poor, in all areas of my life, I will stay with this person and be true. In our passage today, when it says here, bring me a heifer and a goat and a pigeon and a turtle dove, and we're like, what is God doing? It doesn't make sense to us. But for Abram, he knew exactly what God was doing. And what God was doing was writing a contract. So in our passage, we see Abram experiencing the most important contract in his life. Because I made a contract to a man, but Abram's making a contract with God. Okay? This is a whole different level, whole different experience. And so what may be obscure to us, it made complete sense to Abram. And it speaks a lot about our God. How God goes about this contract signing business tells us a lot about God's character. So everyone buckle up. We're going to learn more about God through this very important story. So here we are. A covenant is a promise, but it's more than a promise. It's a legally binding contract. A legally binding contract. So this happens right after, okay? So if you look at Genesis 15, last week we saw he was scared. And God was like, do not be afraid. I will be with you. I promise you will have a son. And Abram was like, I don't know, man. I'm getting old. Sarah's getting old. They probably didn't know, scientifically, biologically, what's going on at that time, but they knew the odds for them to get pregnant were getting more and more slim with every year. And so here they are, Harabuji Harmony, grandma, grandpa, super old, okay? Old bodies. And God is saying, you will have a child that will be as numerous as the stars in the sky, okay? And he believed. And that was what was amazing, is Abram believed. Remember, Abram did not come from a family that we know of that knew God deeply. He was in the midst of living in Babylonia and then into Haran, and his family, for all we know, were idol worshipers. He did not really know God deeply, but for whatever reason, the way God met him was so significant enough that he knew, I gotta follow this guy. I gotta follow this God to wherever he leads me. So we see such great faith, and yet we also see Abraham say, but how? How will I know? I mean, I know I followed you. I left everything. I did everything you said, but still I have doubt. And what I want you to see today is yourself in Abram's story. Because God didn't pick Abram because he was perfect. God didn't pick Abram because he was the best model of faith. God picked Abram because he was human, like you and I. There was nothing spectacular about him. Actually, the prime of his life was probably over at this point. You guys are in the prime of your life right now. Most of us. I'm still in the prime of my life, I believe, okay? We are in the prime of our lives. Abram was not. He was past that season. And yet God picked him for a reason. Just as God picked you in this generation, in this time, to be believers, to know him deeply. In your generation, God has chosen you for a reason. And I want you to see yourself through Abram. So here we are in Genesis 15. This is after the big star spectacle. It's beautiful. Who's seen stars in the mountains? It's gorgeous, right? Out here, you can't really tell because there's so many lights. But in the mountains or somewhere where there's no lights, it's beautiful. Think about how much that really touched Abram's heart. Wow, here I am with no children, but God said. Do you think every time, do you know how many times night happens? Every day. Every 24 hours, night happens. And so every day, Abram is reminded every day of what God said would be true. Now that alone may seem like enough, but right after that moment, literally the next verse 7, let's go here, verse 7. Then the Lord said, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur. In other words, he's saying, remember where you came from. He's saying, remember where you came from. You did not know me in that land. You did not worship me in that land. Nothing you did makes you worthy to receive my promise, and yet I am giving you this promise. Remember where you came from, and I will give you this land as your possession. But, I love but in the Bible because but is like where I live, okay? Like I got so much faith, stars, we're all good, and then but God. Like how much of us are like that? Like, God, okay, I'll live for you, but God, it's hard. I lose faith sometimes. But Abram replied, look at his response. I love his response. Oh, sovereign Lord, how can I be sure that I will actually possess it? Do you see there's a tension right here? This so perfectly captures what it looks like to be a person of faith. Oh, sovereign Lord. He's not just calling him this because he's bored. He's not just calling him this because this is like a nickname. He is truly calling God, God, you are sovereign. You rule, and literally all of this is a piece of cake to you. You rule over everything. You're the one who made woman and man. You can make a child out of just whatever. You can do whatever you want. Oh, sovereign Lord, I acknowledge that you are God. And sometimes we feel like that. We know God is sovereign. We know in our heads most of the time that God is almighty and powerful. We know that. And there is this tension, this doubt, but how will I know? How will I know it will really happen? My friends, this is a picture of faith right here. This is the picture of faith. That tension all the time that we're wrestling with. What I want you to see is that when we land in a space of like, God, how will I know? How will I know? How will I know that you will do what you say? How will I know that you care for me? How do I know? How do I know? How do I know? How do I know that you are real when everyone else around me in this world is telling me no? How can I live for you when the culture goes against you? How can I know? What I want you to see is what comes before that. Oh, sovereign Lord. Because that's who he is. Regardless of your doubt, even in the midst of doubt, notice that God is not mad. He's like, why you like some mad Korean mom, like, why you doubt me? That's not his response. God's response is, let me show you. Notice that when Abram doubted about his descendants, God was like, okay, come here. Let's go outside. Look at the stars. In other words, God spoke to Abram in a way that Abram could understand, in a way that Abram could be reassured. Only after Abram voiced his doubt, do you hear me? Only after Abram voiced his doubt does God show him something tangible to help him understand. Yeah? When we have doubt, notice I say when, not if. Because no matter how long you've been in this faith, no matter how long you've journeyed as a Christian, you will have doubts, moments when we grow apathetic or weak in our faith, or we doubt or we have questions. You will have those moments. Because if you live in this world, the world will cause you to doubt. That's how it works. But when you voice that to God, saying, oh, sovereign Lord, I know you are God. I know you are God, and I'm still struggling to believe that you are somehow sovereign over this issue in my family, over this cancer, over this illness, over this bankruptcy, whatever you're going through in life, like over this brokenhearted relationship, over all of these things. God, I know you're sovereign, but still, how can I know that you're with me, that you care for me, that you have good plans for me, that you call me to a life for you? I want you to remember this tension, this both, he's sovereign and I doubt, that is where faith grows. That is where faith grows. So you guys know I hit 35, and I have this running joke now that when you hit your mid-30s, everything starts to hurt. Okay? That's what's the new 35, is everything starts to hurt, okay? When I was younger, I didn't have to work out very hard, and I would still be kind of healthy, you know? But now, if I don't do anything, if I like don't walk or do some weights or like do some stretching, if I don't do anything for like a week, literally my body feels like it aged 10 years, okay? Because here's what I realized. I'm at the stage in my life where if you don't do anything actively, you will automatically regress. Your body will automatically regress. Women, do you guys know, women, after age 26, you lose 1% muscle mass every single year of your life, just by existing. You don't have to try, okay? That's how women's bodies are. So, like literally, I've compounded that by like 9% right now already from when I was 26. And so, if I don't do anything, I will regress. I have to actively try harder and do more, stretch, be healthier, all the things. I have to actually try now, you know? Same thing with faith. If you are not actively like moving in your faith, and by actively, I mean telling God your doubts, wrestling with your doubts, staying in a community that helps you wrestle with your doubts, or staying connected to worship, whatever you're doing, if you're not actively doing that, you will regress. You will. It is very easy to do that in your life. And so, it is only in the tension that you can grow. Just like when you work out, you lift weights. What's the point of that? It's to stretch your muscles, right? You're tearing them to rebuild them, I think. But the point being, okay, like that's how you build muscle, right? In your faith, it has to be stretched and broken and tested and tried for then it to become stronger. So when you are tested in your faith, do not withdraw. Understand that that is actually your faith growing stronger in the tension. But how does God respond? Okay? Literally, next verse, verse 9. He says, bring me all these animals. And to us, we're like, old MacDonald had a farm? Like, what are you talking about, God? Like, do you like animals? Like, what's going on? But Abram knew exactly what God was doing. In other words, it's like, if you're like, okay, God, what am I supposed to do? And God's like, all right, get a lawyer. Get a lawyer. Let's draft a contract. Get a pen. You're going to read it. You're going to sign it. That's what does it make sense? That's our modern day equivalent. He's like, I understand you're having a hard time believing. And so I will write this so clearly for you so that you will understand. And so Abraham goes and he rounds up all the animals and he kills them and he cuts them in half. Now, why? Because that is gory and bloody and kind of gross. Here's how they would write a contract in that time. So for example, there's like a father giving away his daughter to be married, okay? And so the groom and the father of the bride write this contract, okay? They would cut animals in half and they would both parties would walk through these bloody carcasses. And what that means is if you don't keep your side of the contract, I can kill you like this. Legally, I can do that. And if you don't keep your side of the contract, then you can kill me like this, okay? Like this is literally a blood contract, okay? Like signing in your own blood. That's basically what it was like at that time. So this was a very common practice. Remember, all of this is rooted in a cultural context, right? So in that time, in the cultures of that time, that's how they wrote contracts. I'm pretty sure if we still wrote contracts like that, we would keep our contracts better, okay? Because I feel like this is pretty intense, okay? So here he is. If you don't keep my end, I can slaughter you in half. Legally, it's okay. So here's God doing this thing. Remember, I told you, both parties usually walk through in between these carcasses. So here we are in the next passage. What happened here? Verse 12, 13, and 16. So the sun's going down. And Abram falls into a deep, deep sleep. This is not just he was tired. This is like God causes him to fall into a deep, deep sleep. And God speaks to him. Remember, this is about how will I know that we will be in this land? That's the question, right? And so God says here, you can be sure that your descendants will be strangers in a foreign land, aka Egypt, and they will spend 400 years enslaved. If I were Abraham, I'd be like, I want out. nope, this is not the contract I signed up for, okay? But God is very clear to him. He's saying, you will possess this land, but not until after slavery. And so he's saying, remember the context again. Who wrote the book of Genesis? Who actually wrote it? What was that, Isaac? Moses. He's writing this after they're freed from slavery. So how encouraging is this to them to hear, whoa, even back then, God knew exactly what would happen. And God said that when we're free, we will go back to that land. So we, all of us, all of these thousands of people who are now freely no longer slaves, we are supposed to go back to that land. Remember, Abraham at that time had no idea there would be an entire nation come out of Egypt that would bring Egypt to their knees. He had no idea. So this is like really cool to see on both sides because Abraham has no idea. But these people, they're like, whoa, that's us. We are the ones. Abraham at that time, how could he have known that we would become this mighty of a nation? And yet here we are. We are the ones stepping in to what God promised Abraham. In so many ways, God wants to encourage each and every one of us by looking back and realizing how God has been faithful in your life. Think back. Think way back. Think to previous generations. Most of you guys know my parents are from Korea, right? They immigrated here. They have that, like, the Notebook love story. I think I shared that with you guys, okay? So my dad became a Christian, the first in his family, and that's how the whole family came to know Jesus. And my mom moved here because she loved him, chose to marry him. My mom's family is all still back in Korea. And most of them aren't religious at all, my mom's side. But I always wonder, sometimes I wonder, like, what if my mom did not think my dad was good looking enough or whatever, whatever it was, to come? What if she hadn't come? I wouldn't exist. Or like, if I was living in Korea, I would not be here. Or I think about, like, I applied to colleges, and the college I ended up going to was the last one I looked up, like the last one I researched, the last one I toured. I did not think I was gonna go there, but I did. But going there brought me to Southern California. And I don't know if you guys know Buksanim, so don't tell him this, but he knows. But like when he was like in high school, his parents were actually debating sending him to like acting school because people kept telling him you should be an actor because you're tall, all these things, we'll get to his head. But like he, for a moment, did contemplate going to acting school. And I always say, thank God you did not go to acting school, because if he hadn't, I would have never met him. Or there's all these moments where I'm like, man, if I had not gone there, if I had not made that choice, if that person had not moved here, and there's so many things that we can trace back in our life that if I had not done or someone had not done, then I would not be here today. I might not be a Christian. I might not be alive. Like, who knows? There's so much in our lives that we have no idea. And yet God is saying, understand that I know it all. And in the good and in the bad, you will be where I call you to be. He's saying you will possess the land. There will be slavery. There will be 400 years of brokenness and oppression. And God is not promising that everything will be okay. But what he's promising is that despite the suffering, they will surely see the promise of God. Let me say that again. Even despite the suffering, they will surely see the promise of God. When God promises something to us, he is not promising us a shortcut. He is not promising us the best life. He's not promising us free from all pain. Do you hear me? Because most of us, when we face pain or suffering or hurt or death, we're like, God, why? And God's like, I know. But I never promised you that following me would mean freedom from all of these hard things. What I promised you is that I will see you through. I will see you through the suffering, and I will be with you at the end of it. Verse 17. So the sun goes down, and darkness fell, And Abram saw a smoking firepot and a flaming torch pass between the halves of the carcasses. So the Lord made a covenant with Abram that day. Remember I told you, both parties traditionally in this contract they would make in that time, both parties had to walk through that carcasses. Okay? The smoking firepot and flaming, can you imagine? He'd probably be like, what am I seeing with my eyes? Like, what is going on? Can you imagine like a smoking firepot and a flaming torch? But the fire represents, typically throughout the scripture, fire represents the zeal and the consuming fire of God. Fire often represents God and its unapproachable holiness. And so you see right now here, Abram is watching God alone walk through that covenant. Only God walked in between. Abram was supposed to, if this is following how they did it in that time. But Abram watched as God walked through and signed the covenant. So in other words, only God signed it. This promise is entirely dependent on God alone fulfilling it. Nothing Abram does, he's a passive participant. He is not an active participant. No matter what Abram and his sons do, no matter how far they go from God, none of this depends on what they do. It all depends on what God does. And God has no one greater than to swear on him than himself. That by his life, by his own death, one day, he would fulfill this promise. What does this sound like to us in our day? I was supposed to die, and yet Jesus died. He walked through and died so that I can have life. There's nothing you and I can do that will make yourself right before God. No matter how good of a person you are, salvation is not earned by what we do. It is a free gift. But a gift is only a gift if the recipient receives the gift. So it is up to us to then walk in faith. We believe in faith and we walk in faith. A lifetime of that tension of, oh, sovereign God, how can I know? How can I know? And it's in that sweet middle spot that your faith will grow. So I know a lot of you are in a season of life where you are there. Oh, sovereign God, I cannot deny you. I cannot walk away from you because I know you and you are real. But how do I know? How do I know? How do I know? How do I know? And what I want to encourage you today is to stay in that sweet spot, because when you do, he will speak to you in a way that you will understand what his promise is for you. Can I have the praise to come up? What about you? Do you believe that the same God of Abram, the same God who did the impossible to free Israel from Egypt, the same God who rescues his people with his very own life, do you believe that same God from yesterday is the same God for you today, leading you even now? Can we all stand?